When I graduated college, the first opportunity I had out of college was an honor to be an intern at the White House. And I remember when I first got there on the first day, I was told about the big boss. Her name was Valerie Jarrett, but she went by VJ for short. And now, years later, after being able to have the privilege of building my own small business, and now that small business conducting programming online, civic programming to inspire and engage the public, I was able to interview that same woman, VJ, the big boss, Valerie Jarrett, to talk about presidential leadership during a time of crisis. And we just finished the interview, and she surprised me at the end of the interview by reading a new chapter that's been written for the paperback copy version of her book, which comes out April 14th, Finding My Voice. And she mentions me in it and that same small business and the work that we're doing at Manny's to civically engage the public. And I just feel like surreal shock, pride in what we're doing at Manny's. But honestly, like if you had told that summer intern who had just graduated from college that VJ was going to include me in her book about her life as an example of what gives her hope, I never ever would have believed you. So I'm feeling like on cloud nine, and also so thankful to her for thinking of including someone like me in a book about her life and all the amazing things that she's been able to do and all the people she's been able to touch. So wow, I just can't believe it, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Thanks. Bye. So let's get right into it, Valerie, shall we?
Please do.
So first I want to ask about the community that you're in now. So you're in New York, and I'd love to start with a note of hope. And can you tell me about something that you've seen in your community over the last couple of weeks that's brought you hope?
Well, I live just a few blocks from Mount Sinai West Hospital.
Mhm.
And every single day when I walk by the hospital, you see the people who are working in the hospital who come outside to take a break just to get a little bit of fresh air.
Yeah.
And every person who walks by says thank you.
Uh,
Everybody says thank you to them. And it's just a small gesture of kindness in a city that sometimes seems where everybody's anonymous, but those little bits of kindness, I think, go a long way, because
yeah.
those folks are going back inside that hospital, putting themselves, their health on their line. They're
Yeah.
worried about their families.
Yeah.
Several of them are staying in hotels here in New York because they don't want to get their families sick. And it's just a huge sacrifice. We have literally thousands of police in New York who have tested positive,
Right.
many more who are out sick. And I think it's just a time for us to not take for granted those who are there to serve us. The grocery store people who I go to the store right around the corner, and I
Yeah.
see them all day long, every day, continuing to be
Yeah.
generous and kind of spirit, but knowing that every person who comes in puts them at risk too. So we owe a debt of gratitude to many folks who are still working
Yes.
through this challenge. And I think, New York in a sense is a microcosm of what I fear is going to happen around the country
Yeah.
if we're not better prepared.
And this is really a time where individuals in the community need to bond together. They need to be grateful and thankful, and also we all need to do our part. So it's nice to hear that that's happening in New York.
Well, it is, and the best way we can do our part right now is to stay home. And I
Yes.
will say it's encouraging to see something like a couple of weeks ago, you'd go for a walk and people weren't observing the social distancing and kids were still playing basketball, and Governor Cuomo shut all that down. He said,
Right.
like, you know what, the best thing you can do, unless it's essential, is to stay home, and not just for yourself, but a lot of people are asymptomatic. And
Yeah.
so they don't even know they're carrying it. And as they interact with everybody else, they're spreading the disease.
It's hard. I interviewed Mayor Breed yesterday, the mayor of San Francisco, and we're as Californians, we want to be outside. That's in our blood. I grew up in LA. I was outside all the time, and so we have to fight against our, in some ways, our instinct. When you're cooped up, you want to go outside, but we have to do what's best for everyone. So
And if you do go out, just keep your distance.
Right. So you ran the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. We're going to focus most of the conversation on presidential leadership, but you have a unique perspective because when you were in the White House, one of your responsibilities was to manage the coordination between the White House and all the different government individuals, the mayors, the governors, state legislatures. And the first question I have for you is about the division of responsibility right now, and what you see as the role of a mayor, a governor, and the executive in this time of crisis, and how those might be different.
Well, ideally, it should be a partnership. Obviously, the elected officials on the ground have the best sense of what's happening, what the needs are, but the information flow should be going up from the city, who are in contact with all the hospitals, to the state that's coordinating a whole host of efforts, and the federal government that should also be providing resources, everything from equipment to financial resources. And so it should be a seamless coordination of effort, ideally. And I will say our experiences, and obviously we dealt with the H1N1, Ebola, Zika, that what I observed effectively is when the federal government is the quarterback, when they're coordinating among the states. So that right now we're seeing, for example, states are competing for resources. And so prices are going up. Well, you shouldn't have New York competing against Michigan. The federal government should be figuring out like who needs those resources the most and ensuring that they're going in the right direction. So New York might need them today because we have a disproportionately large percentage of people who are infected, but Nebraska might need them tomorrow, and you need a quarterback in the federal government helping to sort that through.
It's interesting, so much of our training is that the most immediate needs should be, you should first go to your local representative. But in times like this, I almost feel like the pyramid is inverted, where, like for instance, as a small business, really very few local municipalities have the resources to provide to small businesses what they need right now. And so we have to kind of flip the script. And a lot of small businesses are looking to the federal government for relief, which is, a little bit strange. And I don't want to badmouth this administration too much, but, this administration has lost a lot of faith in certain parts of this country. And so I now find myself in a strange position of really, really needing our federal government to get its act together to help me with my small business.
Well, I will say this is a wake-up call for many people who don't have a clear understanding of what government does and the vitality of the services that they provide. It is a lifeline. The funds that were appropriated for Congress that we talked about earlier, that should be flowing through the Small Business Administration to the banks to provide that important capital so small businesses can keep afloat. That has to run seamlessly and quickly. And I think people oftentimes, as I said, they take government for granted, they shun it, they think it's not responsible, and our goal is to have the most efficient government possible. And I think we were, in a sense, there for a whole host of reasons, the administration was caught flat-footed, and that's unfortunate, but we are where we are. And so the question is, what do we do going forward? There'll be plenty of time to look back to figure out, it's called an after action, to figure out, where were the balls dropped. But right now, and I think we're seeing this with the governors who, regardless of political ideology, they're saying, I can't afford to fight with the federal government. I need their support and cooperation. And so I think what you hope to see is for people to put political differences aside and certainly not decide who gets resources based on whether the governor is nice to you or compliments you. The people that governor represents are your constituents too.
Okay, last question before we get to a broader conversation about presidential leadership. If you were running OPE, the Office of Public Engagement, right now, what would you be doing?
Well, what I would be doing is reaching out to the whole range of constituents to make sure we were fully briefed on what's happening on the ground. We would be coordinating efforts with the business community to make sure that we were thinking through how to most effectively use a partnership with them, for example. We would be making sure that we were in touch with both everyone from the hospitals to the first responders to patients who were saying, I'm in dire need of services and I can't get a test. We were there to be the pulse of what's happening around the country and make sure that the decision makers had that information so that they were making informed decisions. So we were the eyes and ears of the country through that Office of Public Engagement.
Okay, so you, Valerie Jarrett, have spent a lot of time with a United States president, right? With President Barack Obama.
8 years.
8 years, and before that, of course, you knew him quite well. And so you are uniquely positioned to talk about the subject about what is required of a United States president in a time of crisis. What qualities are advantageous, and also what role do they play in moments just like the one we're in right now? So can you give us some insight into what's required out of a president right now and what qualities are most advantageous?
Well, I think right now people look to the president for leadership. Tone starts at the top. It's important that the president assemble a team of experts so that whatever he says is evidence-based. It's appropriate for the president to defer to the experts because right now people want facts, and they want facts that are not just hopeful and make me feel better today like a sugar high. They want to know exactly what's going on. And so when we were in the White House, President Obama had councils that ran a process. Information came up through the experts to his advisors, and then it was presented to him in a form where he could digest it quickly and efficiently and make decisions. Mm-hmm. I think it's important that the tone is not just what's happening here in our country, but people look to the President of the United States for global leadership.
Right.
So all eyes are on the President of the United States, and I think it's so important at times like that that you keep in mind that everything you say has to be accurate, everything you say has to be evidence-based. And yes, it's important to get people to sense this appreciation that we can get through this, but you have to be direct and you have to be honest and you have to make sure you know your facts.
So I don't know where you are with Governor Cuomo, but I have to say, from this side of the country, I have been watching his press conferences, and I think he's doing a really great job of doing what you just said, delivering facts, but also being sober in his delivery, being honest when there's something that he doesn't know. And I don't know, I'm feeling a little bit of Cuomo envy right now. I mean,
everyone is. You think you feel it. Oh my God.
I want to be friends with him. I want him to tell me bedtime stories. I want all of it. You know what I mean?
Well, one of the skills that he has is, first of all, he has assembled a great team. He makes sure that the information he has is accurate. You're right. If he doesn't know the answer to something, he will say, I don't know it. But the other thing that he's doing that I think has made New Yorkers feel better, and people all around the country, because I have friends from around the country who say they're not watching the White House briefings. No. They're turning into the New York governor every single day.
That's what I'm doing.
And it's like he talks about his mom and what it's like for him not to be able to see her, their Sunday dinners and Italian spaghetti. And then right? And now his brother Chris is sick, and you see the banter. Those two, he's humanizing himself. And I think at times like this, we want our leaders to be human so that we will trust them. And I think what Governor Cuomo has succeeded in doing very effectively is to ensure that people trust him, because he knows that his words can be life or death for people. I mean, if he pops up and says some medicine works when it's not based in evidence that it does, and then people go out and take that medicine, he knows what could happen. There are consequences, serious consequences to people who are in these leadership positions. And so I have been very, very impressed with how he's handled this crisis.
I'm taking a lot of lessons from him about what effective leadership looks like. Okay, so you mentioned it a couple of times already, but actually when President Obama was president and you were advising him, we both were trying to exit a recession and utilizing the stimulus, and also had a couple global pandemics, or things like pandemics, H1N1, Zika, Ebola. Can you tell me about what it was like in both during a time that was similar in that there was an international epidemiological issue, and also coming out of the recession, and how you saw President Obama act as a leader in those moments?
Well, he had the ability to multitask. He could digest a lot of information that was presented to him. He could triage and figure out what decisions needed to be made today, which ones could he put off. He was really always willing to say, you know what, I don't have enough information yet to make a decision. Go back and study X, Y, Z, and then come back to me. And we organized the White House in a way where folks who were working on the economy could go and do that. People who were working on healthcare matters could go and do that. And then he ultimately had to get flows of information from all those different compartments. But they were able to concentrate solely on what their piece of business was, and then make recommendations up to him.
For folks who are tuning in, first of all, thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. If you have questions for Valerie Jarrett, you can start typing them into the Q&A box. So at any point now, you can start writing your questions and we'll filter them and answer them. David Plouffe, when I interviewed him last week, he said that sometimes actually it was frustrating because folks around him wanted him to say something or get out in front of an issue, but he actually, sometimes when he felt like he wasn't ready, he didn't have the information he needed or knew what to say, he would wait until he was at that point. Was that your experience as well? And what do you think that says?
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, everybody has an opinion about what the president should be doing, but ultimately you have to trust your own judgment.
Right.
And yes, you surround yourself with experts, but ultimately it's what comes out of the president's mouth that determines whether or not citizens trust him or not. And there were many occasions where without all the information, someone might say, well, you know, the 24 news cycle would like an answer to this question.
Right.
And it takes a lot of strength to be able to say, no, you know what, I'm not ready yet.
Right.
I need more information. We don't have all the facts yet.
Yeah.
And to resist that impulse to give in to that pressure, when that pressure might misinform people.
Right. I want to change tact a little bit and talk about women and girls, because it's something that you and Tina and so many people in the White House worked so hard on. And I don't think it's getting enough attention right now about kind of the impact of what is happening on women and girls. And so I just wanted to ask you about that and what you're hearing and seeing, and give you the opportunity to speak a little bit about it.
Well, you know, just earlier in the week, we had our Equal Pay Day, and we call it that. It's not a celebration. It's how long women have to work before they're going to earn the same amount as men in the course of the year. Right. Women are still only making a little over 80 cents on the dollar. Women of color, substantially less than that. And at times like this, when we're looking at the shockwaves through the economy, oftentimes women are in lower wage jobs, right. Service jobs, where either they're being laid off or they're in harm's way. Right. And so I think that, in a sense, this crisis has brought to a head just how vulnerable so many working families are, but particularly women. After we left the White House, Manny, you know, Tina and I set up a 501c3 called the United States of Women. It's nonpartisan. It's all about what can we do to close the gender gap? What can we do to make sure that every girl grows up and has a fair chance and opportunity? We were going to have a summit in Texas in July, so that's off for the time being, but the work continues. And so we are working around the country with ambassadors all over the country, holding up best practices, evidence best practices that close that gender gap.
Okay, I know it probably feels inappropriate to talk about this, but I do think it's important given just how much is at stake here. The 2020 election, you know, I've spoken about it with a bunch of people already on these calls, and it is so important. I think what's going on right now shows us the importance of strong leadership in the White House. How do you think all of this is going to affect the ability to organize for this election? And also, are you nervous? Are you worried about how this is going to affect it?
Oh, I'm very concerned. Look, we already have too many states that are making it difficult for people to vote through
Right.
voter suppression, through laws and practices.
Right.
And at a time like this where we are not sure quite yet how we're going to be able to vote, it's important that we put pressure on the secretaries of state around the country to make sure they're prepared in the event going to the polls is not possible. We might need people to mail in their ballots, do it online. We have to get a lot more creative. Another organization that you know I'm involved in that Michelle Obama launched is called When We All Vote. And it's designed to get people to appreciate, as they certainly should right this minute, how important our leaders are, and not just about one election or one person running for office, but every election. We were just talking about all the different layers of government. It doesn't just matter who the president of the United States is. It matters who is your mayor, who's on the city council, who are the prosecutors, who are the state legislature, drawing lines that affect how we are represented and how we are funded. And so we want to continue that important work right now to try to change the culture in our country around voting, particularly focusing on our young people. Evidence shows that if you vote in your first election, chances are you'll become a lifelong voter. So we are working with high schools around the country to try to get people registered to vote, colleges and universities, our mayors around the country who are also on the front line. So many people have the ability to touch people where they are. Just last week, DJ Nice, who's been doing these couch parties.
Yes, I saw that.
On Instagram Live, he is the
guy?
best DJ in the world, and he dedicated one of the nights to raising awareness about when we all vote. And we will get thousands of people who signed up to volunteer to help register people to vote. And so we're looking for creative ways like that to keep the energy going around the importance of registering and also turning out to vote.
Great. My last question to you before we get to the audience Q&A is, you professionally advised President Obama. So what would you, in addition to obviously a lot of other things, how would you advise him right now? Like, what do you think President Obama's role should be at this very moment as a former United States president, and also someone who, especially for my generation, represents so much more than just his presidency, but a time of hope?
Yes, well, he certainly has that ability to lead, to give people inspiration and hope. If you follow him on Twitter and Instagram, you'll see that a lot of what the content that he has been distributing is fact-based evidence and information designed to keep people safe, showing appreciation for the first responders. And so I think that's the mechanism that he's using to communicate with he's got more followers than certainly anybody else in elected office by far. And so that's a great platform for him to use to try to inspire, motivate, and show appreciation.
Okay, so Maxine, thank you for that, Valerie, appreciate it. Maxine, her question is, what actions can we take now and going forward to make sure that our federal government reflects the values that provide for healthcare, housing, and food? Also, what do we do to make sure there's transparency for the decisions that are being made?
We have to hold our elected officials accountable. That begins at the ballot box by making sure that you vote for people who reflect your values, who have a track record of supporting issues that you care about, and the ones that you just mentioned are vitally important. And then once they're elected, you have to hold them accountable. You can't just say, okay, now you're elected, I'm going to walk away. You have to show up at city council meetings. You have to send letters and call your congressmen and women. You have to make sure that every branch of the government knows that you are there and that you are watching. And if they know that, then they will be accountable to you. And if we don't do that, if we abdicate that of important responsibility, I promise you they'll do what's in their short-term political interest, which isn't always in your interest. And so be informed, do your homework, vote, and then hold your elected official accountable.
Maybe this is the same answer to the question, but Sean Anderson wants to ask, how do we, either at the state or federal level, address the health equity gap, the likelihood that this pandemic will have compounding effects on people of color?
Well, I'm really glad you raised that, because one of the very troubling decisions that came out of the administration last week was this unwillingness to open up the exchanges so that people can enroll. There is a clear past practice, and the regs provide that the Department of Health and Human Services, when anything extraordinary happens, if there's a change of circumstances, if you change your job, for example, if you have a baby, if you get married, then you're able to enroll in the exchanges. And they could do that in this circumstance. Whenever there's a national crisis or national disaster such as this, they could let people enroll in the exchanges, because there are so many people who are right on that bubble and don't have health insurance. And what we're going to see more of, unless we're able to get everybody health insurance, is that people who do not have resources, who do not have health insurance, are going to disproportionately suffer.
Right.
And they can't afford the treatment. They can't afford a trip to the emergency room. It's expensive to go to the emergency room. And so putting pressure on the federal government to open up those exchanges and let people in, and putting pressure on the states, I think it's 14 states remain that have not expanded the Medicaid provisions in the Affordable Care Act that give the opportunity for so many more people to be covered by insurance. We have to hold the White House and we have to hold those governors accountable.
Okay. Lauren Babb asks, are you worried about the census operations?
Yes, I am worried about the census. And right now, I just received my envelope in the mail a few days ago.
Great.
All across the country, people are receiving their census. Fill it out. You have to fill it out. I think that, obviously there are lots of organizations, fabulous organizations around the country that are working on getting people to turn out and fill out the census. But at a time when people are scared and they have a lot on their plate and they're losing their jobs, they might forget. And so it doesn't take long. It just takes a couple of minutes. It is worth your time. It will determine, again, how resources flow to your community.
Also,
and so fill out those forms.
We're hosting a census fill out party with a very special guest. And so we're going to be having
Great.
folks fill out their census all together on Zoom or whatever we end up using, and to hopefully get some kind of make it fun.
Good.
Nick McCarthy, and also we have this similar question from, I don't know where it went, but question about the Biden team, and what would your guidance be to the Biden team about how to effectively present an alternative form of presidential leadership during this unprecedented time? And I'll add just more generally, like if you were advising Vice President Biden right now on how to do a good job, what would you say to him, and what would you advise to him and his team?
I give him the same advice I give all of the candidates. Be honest and direct and open with the American people. Tell them what you know. Tell them how you would be handling the situation. Give them specific advice for ways in which they can keep themselves safe. Be that inspiration of hope, and that person who gives them evidence and hard facts that they need to have. It is a time for our country to rally together. But we have a very important election coming up in the fall. And so and I've said this throughout the entire campaign when the field was plentiful and now that it is shrunk, is that it is really important that the Democratic nominee emerge as someone that the country can trust, that we know we will be safe in that person's hand. And they need to pick a running mate who will complement that skill set and develop the energy and enthusiasm as a team that we're going to need going into the fall election.
Which woman would you advise Vice President Biden? Come on.
You know what?
Us chickens, just the two of us.
Oh yeah, just us. I would say this to you. There are
an
embarrassment of riches of very, very qualified women. Any one of who would be a terrific running mate. It's one of the few decisions that you get to make all by yourself when you're the nominee. I wouldn't want to.
If you were the Democratic nominee right now, and you were going to be on that stage, who would you choose as your female running mate, Valerie?
It'd be so hard to choose. They're just so many.
But you got to make a choice. The choice has to be made. And who's
I don't actually have to make a choice. It's too soon to make a choice. But I will say one thing President Obama did, and a serious note here, is that he asked Caroline Kennedy and Eric Holder to go through a process for him to come up with candidates. And I thought that was really good. And I will say, Vice President Biden was at the top of President Obama's list of potential candidates at the beginning of the process. And at the end, he was still at the very top. But I think it was important to have people who were credible, who understood how important it was to do your homework on the candidates, vet the candidates, go through that important process. So this is a long way of saying I'm not answering your question.
Well, I will be interviewing Stacey Abrams at the end of the month. So maybe between now and then, we'll know a little bit more. Who knows?
She's a superstar. Let me tell you, I campaigned with her down in Georgia, and I've gotten to know her really, really well. What an incredible human being, amazing leader, and a good friend.
Last audience question is from Rebecca. Have you spoken to President Obama during this crisis, and has he had any words of inspiration that you can share with us? Thank you.
Well, I talk to him all the time. Yeah, and I think, there isn't a time I talk to him, he doesn't ask about my family and how everyone is doing. And this is a time where we should all stay close to our family and friends, and we can't do it physically. But I tell you, I've learned how to be a pretty good Zoom operator,
Yes.
and I encourage. I mean, this is really serious. I think I'm worried about everybody's physical health, but I'm also worried about our mental health.
Mhm.
And I think that at times like this, people get very lonely
Mhm.
and feel isolated and feel scared and reach out. There are professional resources available in every community, but there's also just nothing like calling a friend. And I know we've become texters, but I will say my phone rings a lot more now
Yep.
than it used to. And I think that's the humanity in all of us. And I would encourage anyone who's feeling lonely, pick up the phone and call a friend. If you need professional help, don't shy away from it. This is not a time to suffer in silence. You need help, you need to get the help.
Your mother in your amazing book, which I should just say to everyone, the paperback version of Valerie's book drops on April 14th. I'm going to be sending you all a link for the paperback version of the book that gets released April 14th. I read it. I loved it. Your mother featured prominently in it. She has such an indomitable spirit, and she's so wonderful. And I just wanted to ask quickly how she's doing, because I know she's in Chicago.
Thank you for asking. My 91-year-old mother, who still works full time,
What?
I know, she still works full time, so she's quite put out that she can't drive to work. Now, I'm not so put out that she can't drive to work, but she's teaching online and she's figuring it out. Fortunately, the weather's getting a little bit better in Chicago, so she can putter in her garden. She probably wouldn't like to use the word putter, but she's a big gardener. And so I'm just so happy that she's safe.
Okay, also, in what must have been an act of God, my operator's computer froze right as Valerie Jarrett surprised us by reading the chapter of the new version of her book, Finding My Voice, paperback, which comes out April 14th, that mentions Manny's and the space that we've created here. And so I don't know why that cut off, probably for some reason, probably to remind us that we need to seize the moment and not, expect there to be a recording of whatever we're experiencing in that moment. So seize the moment. Don't expect a recording. I'm so sorry that it shut off right at that moment. But Carpe Diem, please tag us at Welcome to Manny's. Please buy Valerie Jarrett's book, Finding My Voice. Paperback comes out April 14th. And join us. Go to joinit.org/o/Manny's and become a sponsor of Manny's and help support my small business. And be well, and be happy, and be safe, and be healthy, and be you.